Okay, today we finally get to talk about literally my favorite theorem of all time, and also, without any exaggeration, I can say one of the most famous and most discussed theorems in all of mathematics, the incompleteness theorem. I'm Cody Rue, and this is Church of Logic. So, what's so cool about this theorem? It really, it's I can't overstate enough. It is one of the most fundamental, most exciting things that has ever happened in mathematics. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. In fact, there are two related theorems, and I'm going to talk about both of them. But they were this very fundamental obstruction to our ability to know the truths of mathematics, and by extension, the truths of things in our world. Right? It it felt like mathematics was, the one domain where we could actually know things, right? We can actually know if there's an infinite number of primes. We can actually know, what all these problems, what all the things are, what the true things are. People were even talking about logic and the quest for God and physics and knowing things about ourselves, and there was this kind of optimistic sentiment in science at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. What's man what's really cool is this problem was kind of solved almost as soon as we had the mathematical tools to talk about it. And what's really exciting is I can kind of explain this to, essentially a layperson, someone who doesn't have that much mathematical background, what these theorems say and why they're cool and how they're proved. And this is mostly not true. Even 19th century mathematics had gotten quite technical at the time. This is kind of an exception, and it's an exception that is also has really philosophical impact. At the time it was proven in 1930, at the same conference, Gödel announced this theorem. The great mathematician, Hilbert, whose first name escapes me, it's David Hilbert. Was basically explaining that we could solve all problems in mathematics, and that there was nothing that could escape, the great human design. The human mind could solve anything. This was the same conference where Gödel announced, "Oh yeah, that's actually not at all possible." And the consequences of that resonated for years and years. Now, there's a matter of some debate, right, what the philosophical consequences of these theorems is. And in some ways, I don't want to overstate the theorem. I don't want to say, hey, this theorem says things about, the universe and, and God and, philosophy at large, metaphysics. No, it's math, right? It has hypotheses, it has a conclusion, and those are kind of they can't be denied. People will often use the incompleteness theorem to say things that are completely outside the realm of mathematics, and I want to insist that that's, I'm not endorsing that, and I don't think you really can do that legitimately. What you can do is try to understand exactly what this theorem says and what it means for this theorem to say those things. So roughly what the theorem says is, if you take a system of logic that's a reasonable one that humans can understand, and that logic says true things, and that logic is consistent, right? It doesn't prove everything. It has theorems and it has non-theorems. Then that logic, there are true things that are the case that the logic can't prove. It's just not powerful enough to prove some of these statements. And that seems kind of crazy, right? Like, what possible, what are these mysterious statements that are true but escape the purview of this logic? And I'm going to explain this, but also, I'm just going to try and give an idea of what the precise meaning of this statement is. So let's just finish with a little bit more historical context. I've explained the completeness theorem, and roughly, I can remind you what it says. It says, say, hey, if you take predicate logic or propositional logic, right? Just take Boolean formulas with ands and ors. We have a bunch of rules to deduce things like, A and not A is true for any, any proposition A, or, A implies A, or, not A and not A, right? So there are tons of things that are true, and we have systems where you can prove these things, and it turns out that you can show mathematically by examining all these kinds of proofs that all the things that are true are also exactly the things you can prove, right? This is the completeness theorem for propositional logic. And it's not hard to prove, but it's not trivial to prove. Emil Post, I think, had done it for his either his master's thesis or his PhD, I forget. And then Gödel had extended that theorem to predicate logic with universal quantifiers and existentials. And this was non-trivial because because these universal quantifiers, it's not clear that they don't quantify over infinite domains, right? Now all of a sudden your proofs can become, very, very large. And, despite that, Gödel showed that, hey, if in every domain of interpretation this proposition is true, then in this logic, which is sort of classical first-order logic, you can prove these things. And basically, the race was on to extend this to arithmetic and more powerful systems, and those systems were actually strong enough to formalize interesting mathematics, which propositional logic and predicate logic are not powerful enough to formalize things like the Fermat theorem or analysis, calculus. So the logic's powerful enough to formalize number theory and analysis. Those were devised, and we had written down systems, but the proof of completeness seemed more elusive for these. People have given it a good shot. Ackermann had given it a good shot, and Hilbert had tried, and Gödel, was throwing his hat in the ring. He's trying to prove completeness for these more powerful logics, for these arithmetic logics. And after a while, he just seemed to be running into a wall, and so he started thinking about, hey, what if it's not true? What can these logics not talk about? And pretty quickly at this point, he came up with these counterexamples, and he came up with these proofs that actually a logic, if it's sufficiently expressive, there are things that it's not going to be able to prove. But again, I'm going to give a little bit more detail on what it means for a logic to be sufficiently expressive and reasonable. But yeah, so Gödel comes out with this. It's a shockwave. People take years to understand it, and to this day, they're still debating the consequences of what these theorems actually mean, in terms of what we can do, like actual consequences for humanity. So yeah, again, can't be overstated about how impressive this discovery was. Gödel, had just thrown a huge rock into the pool of mathematics at the time. He'd solved this huge question that David Hilbert had in the opposite way of what Hilbert had hoped for it to be solved. But he does solve it, and I feel like this is really kind of the defining moment where mathematical logic became something that people cared about, and where they had real, true insights about mathematics. All right, next time I'm actually explaining what the statement says. And then I'll go on to the second incompleteness theorem and the proofs of these theorems.